Naranam Namaskritya Sarvakarmani Karaye. We salute the ever-blessed Supreme Lord before undertaking any action, including this one. We purify ourselves with the mantra Om Vishnu. Om Vishnu. Om Vishnu. Om Vishnu. Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Tada Pashyanti Suraya Viviva Chakshuratatam. This mantra expresses ancient Vedic mantra that the seers, the sages, they see always the divine reality, the supreme abode of Vishnu, the all-pervading, like the sky, vast as the sky spread before their eyes. Om apavitra pavitro va sarvavasthamito viva yasmare pundarikaksham sabhahyam yantarashruti. Wherever we may be, in whatever condition we may find ourselves, pure or impure, simply by remembering the lotus-eyed Lord, we become pure, both inside and out. Tasmai Sopakarnai Vidyam. Om Tasmai Sopakarnai Vidyam. Om Tasmai Sopakarnai Vidyam. Om Naivedyam Vividam Deva Sharkara Divinirmitam Mayanvirikam Bhaktya Vyahana Parameshwara. Om Airam Sopakarnai Vidyam Sarvadevi Devi Swarupaya Sri Ram Krishnaya Deviyam. O Ramakrishna, be pleased to accept this offering of fruits and sweets and snacks. You are the very embodiment of all the divine manifestations. Om Idam Pama Kodakam Sarvadevi Devi Swarupaya Sri Ram Krishnaya. Sing along if you require.
The plate. Thank you, Maharaj.
Listening the hymn to the Divine Mother, Sarva Mangala Mangala. No, I'll play it. Oh, Sarva Mangala Mangale Shive Sarva Charanye Trambake Gare Narayani Jai Mahayoganandaji Nihai ki jai, jai Bhagavan Shri Ram Krishna Dev ki jai, jai Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. So today being the day that we're observing Holi, which is also the birthday of Sri Chaitanya, the great incarnation of Radha and Krishna together in one body, and who taught the spread far and wide the practice of the chanting of the name of Krishna. We'll have a short, we'll have a little kirtan, and I want you all to sing with me. However, let me share with you the words, because it starts with Sri Ramakrishna, and then it goes to Hare Krishna, and again it goes to Jai Ma. The part to Ramakrishna, it says Jai Ramakrishna, Jai Ramakrishna, Krishna Ramachandraya, Krishna Ramachandraya Namo, Ram, something like that, Jai Ramakrishna. Then there's a few lines, it says Yuga Avatar, the incarnation of this age, Yuga Avatar, Sarva Deva Devaya, Sarva Deva Devaya, Yuga Avatar, Sarva Deva Devaya, Sarva Dharma Samanvaya, means bringing harmony among all religions, Sarva Bhava Rakshaya, protecting all the moods, all the bhavas. And then we get Hare Krishna, and then Jai Mata. So sing with me, or I'll sing the first time, you follow. Sing it twice each time. Let's try. Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Rama Krishna Devaya Namo, Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Rama Krishna Devaya Namo, Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Rama Krishna Devaya Namo, Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Rama Krishna Devaya Namo, Yoga Avatar Namo, Dharma Deva Devaya Namo, Yoga Avatar Namo, Dharma Deva Devaya Namo, Sarva Dharma Sampadvaya, Sarva Bhavarashaya Namo, Sarva Dharma Sampadvaya, Sarva Bhavarashaya Namo, Yoga Avatar Namo, Sarva Deva Devaya Namo, Yoga Avatar Namo, Sarva Deva Devaya Namo, Sarva Dharma Sampadvaya, Sarva Bhavarashaya Namo, Sarva Dharma Sampadvaya, Sarva Bhavarashaya Namo, Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Rama Krishna Devaya Namo, Rama Krishna, Rama Krishna, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Krishna Rama Chandraya Namo, Rama Krishna Devaya Namo, Yoga Avatara Namo, Sarva Deva Devaya Namo, Yoga Avatara Namo, Sarva Deva Devaya Namo, Sarva Dharma Samadvaya, Sarva Bhavanachaya Namo, Sarva Dharma Samadvaya, Sarva Bhavanachaya Namo, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Ma, 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 So that's fun. No, singing the holidays. And now we should offer a little powder. Nor do we do that at the end. We can offer it now, no? A little powder. So do we do the rest of the people afterwards? Huh? Afterwards? Because the camera's on, huh? Okay. This is a really nice picture. He's in ecstasy and he's dancing. He used to dance with both arms upraised. Know that he would encourage people just sing and dance in the name of God. Sing and dance and have the joy. And he was a great bringer of all the no observing of caste. Everyone was welcome to sing the Lord's name. There was no observance of caste or all those things. He was a real breaker of caste. And Sri Ramakrishna also used to say that that's the way actually the devotees form their own caste. So in India still, even now, there's still lingering caste issues sometimes. This is really the recipe for overcoming that, because the devotees are bound together in a family of love. So it's wonderful to see. And we see a lot of similarities with Sri Ramakrishna and Chaitanya Deva. He used to, Sri Ramakrishna also used to go into ecstasy and dance and sing, and everyone would become intoxicated with him present. Somehow he would change the atmosphere and everyone would become intoxicated. And he often used to describe Chaitanya Deva's 3 states of consciousness. That when he was conscious of the external world, he would sing and dance. And then he would become semi-conscious, and he couldn't speak. He could still dance, but he could no longer speak. He could no longer sing the name. And then he would enter into deep samadhi, deep ecstasy, where he would become like a statue, completely oblivious of the outside world. And when Sri Ramakrishna is talking about Sri Chaitanya like that, actually he's describing himself. He also had these same experiences. So now I think we should try to shift gears a little, and we'll have a talk on Vedanta and near-death experiences, which is a favorite topic of mine. And so I guess I'll move to the chair then.
Yeah.
And there's a microphone set up here. Very good.
I got arranged it.
Let's put it down a little bit. Yeah, this way. Just a little closer. Okay, ready? Tighten that up. And this one can tighten. Check. Oh, there's an echo. Check. Check. I took off the echo. That was a little much. Okay, so it's kind of a difficult transition, isn't it? From the glorious singing the name and ecstasy and that. And now we're going to talk about near-death experiences and Vedanta. So, there's always this doubt. Death is like the big question. What happens next? What happens when we die? And this was the big question also that Nachiketa had for Yama in the Katha Upanishad. Even for as long as human beings have begun to start thinking and pondering our situation, we've asked this question: what happens? And it's like the veil that cannot be crossed. We can't see what it is. That beautiful mantra of the Katha Upanishad. Ye yam prete vichikitsa manushye asti yeke nayam asti tichaike etad vidyam anushishtastvayaham varanamesha varastatiyaha. The third boon that I want to have from you, O Yama. Some people say after death, there's this doubt. Some people say asti, he is.
And then other people say, Nayam asti, he is not. When someone dies, he continues to exist or he doesn't continue to exist. This is the big doubt. Do we continue or is it all over? This is I want to know from you. And of course, the whole story of how Yama tests him and all that. But of course, the answer is the knowing self is not born. The self, our true self, is not born, nor does it die. It does not come from anything. Nothing comes from it. It is birthless, eternal, everlasting, and ancient. It is not killed when the body is killed. Najayate mriyate va vipaschinayam kutaschinna babhuva kaschit ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharire. So this is the definitive answer that Yama gives to Nachiketa, that who we are, the true self, does not die. And nor is it actually born. So it's bodies which are born and bodies which die, but we are eternal. So we have this authoritative assurance of the ancient scriptures, of the seers of Vedanta. And we have the assurance also of the great teachers like in modern times of Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. So our faith is restored to a certain extent. Sri Ramakrishna says, and he was dedicated to truth, and he is giving us many assurances. And yet, doubt dies very hard. So we live in a very materialistic world where science really reigns supreme in the general culture. And science says there's no need for us to posit a soul. We don't need that. Brain explains everything. We don't need to have any idea of a separate existence beyond the body. And so we get, again, this niggling doubt. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's just our brains are incredibly complex machines and they can do an incredible number of things. And when we get brain troubles, then we get troubles. Like if we get a problem in the brain and we can no longer speak, or we can no longer think properly, or we forget everything. So maybe after all, they're right. Maybe it's just brain. Well, there's a tremendous new, not exactly new, but newly coming into a wider and wider knowledge is these reports of near-death experiences and also out-of-body experiences and after-death communications and other such research, reincarnation research. This kind of research has been going on for some time, and it's now starting to getting wider and wider publicity. And I understand there's even something on Netflix about it. Who was telling me about that? Okay, so today we're going to look primarily at near-death experiences, or abbreviated as NDEs. And those who experience them are called NDEers. So it's a fascinating phenomenon. People who have died, I think everyone has heard of near-death experience by now, right? No one is new to this idea. So people who have died on operating tables, or in car accidents, or in drowning accidents, or by gunshots, or so many ways to die. So they die, heart attacks, etc. And then are resuscitated. They come back. They are somehow resuscitated after dying. They sometimes report remarkable experiences of being conscious and being outside of their body, while they were dead, they were actually conscious outside their body, perhaps meeting deceased relatives, meeting other beings, meeting some kind of being that they might describe as God or as the divine, having transcendent, transformative, and profoundly spiritual experiences sometimes. So the question is, how do these experiences, these reports, how do they tally with the teachings of Vedanta? Do they tally? I find it, and I think you'll agree, yes. They very much tally with the teachings of Vedanta. So this is a tremendous reassurance. They confirm and validate the teachings of the scriptures, that we are not bodies, and that even if we go a little further, there are a few experiences that even touch on this idea that we are not our minds also. So a little history. People have been having and reporting near-death experiences for millennia, thousands of years, but there is evidence of that, but it's only recently becoming widely acknowledged. And the watershed moment was Dr. Raymond Moody's 1975 book, Life After Life. He coined the term near-death experience. And of course, now there's a lot of websites, books, videos, TV programs, and now the evidence is being collected in systematic ways. Scientists hate anecdotal evidence. They say that's no good. It's just an anecdote. It's just a story. It doesn't prove anything. So rather than having anecdotal evidence, scientists are now collecting reports and collating them in using statistical methods. So it's, I wonder if there's a little feedback. It's using statistical methods of data analysis. So it's actually very exciting to see how scientists are now looking at this experience, these reports, and what was always the domain of religion and of the study of religious people, spiritual people, now is also being taken up by scientists. What happens next? And it turns out that we can gain some insights through these reports of near-death experiences. So many thousands of individual experiences have been published on the websites. Dozens of books, often by prominent medical doctors who have seen the light, as it were. And so it's forming an important area of intersection between religion and between science and religion, particularly in the area of medicine. And one particular discipline of modern medical science that has played a big role in this is what is called resuscitation medicine. And this is the science and art, I suppose, of resuscitating people who have died. And it has made tremendous strides. It used to be when you're dead, you're dead. And now it turns out that sometimes when you're dead, you're not dead yet. And they can revive you. They can revive us. Heart attacks particularly. There's CPR was only invented in the 1960s, or it was only started being taught and used widely. And there's a lot of progress now with drugs and various instruments. And it is possible to resuscitate people who have died minutes or sometimes even hours ago, particularly in the case of freezing deaths, when someone falls through the ice into freezing cold water and their bodies are chilled immediately to a very low temperature, so the body doesn't start decaying. And they can oftentimes they can resuscitate people like that hours later. And this is also a hint. The cardiologists who treat heart attacks, they immediately chill the body. When the heart attack victim comes into an emergency room, the most modern emergency rooms will immediately chill the body. There's a much greater chance of successful resuscitation. So what was always a one-way street, a point of no return, has now become, at least in some cases, a two-way street, a revolving door. And that line which no one could ever cross, with all that endless speculation of what is on the other side, now we're getting some hints. Because what doctors were finding as they're starting to learn to resuscitate people is that some people would report these remarkable experiences, and they themselves wouldn't know what to make of it. And of course, most doctors, being thoroughly materialistic, rejected these reports. And it's quite painful for someone who's had such an experience to be doubted, to be dismissed, to be, you need a psychiatrist, to go see a psychiatrist. This kind of things happen. So it's actually quite tragic because these reports are met with you can say, skepticism and incredulity. So they keep quiet. And such experiences are chalked off to oh, it's just the experiences of a dying brain. It's a lack of oxygen, hypoxia that does it. It's not. They've done tests about that. Deprive a brain of oxygen, it has hallucinations. They're disjointed. They make no sense. They're often terrifying. Near-death experiences are the opposite. They're not disjointed. They're very cogent and complete. People feel not less conscious, but rather more conscious than in the waking state. So this is these kinds of, they try to explain them away because they can't move out of their paradigm. That what we are, all that we are, is the activity of brain cells. They can't go beyond that. But people are starting to go beyond it finally. So that's the taboo in scientific circles is being broken. So Moody's book, incidentally, was a bestseller, 13 million copies, and it was translated into 12 languages. So it really was a groundbreaking book. And he interviewed hundreds of people who had reported having experiences after death and found a number of common factors. He identified 9 of them. Although each experience is unique, but there are a number of common factors. Now, there's a lot more research has been done, and one of the prominent researchers is one Dr. Jeffrey Long, not the Vedanta doctor. There's a Jeffrey Long in Pennsylvania who's a teacher of comparative religion, and he's also a Vedanta student, and he lectures at some of our centers. Not that Jeffrey Long, a different Dr. Jeffrey Long. He's an oncologist in maybe in Arizona or something. No, it says here in Louisiana. So he has developed this statistical analysis. Scientific research, usually you have to do tests, right? Now, this is one area where it's a little difficult. You can't start killing people and then reviving them and see. Some people might not revive. It's not practical that way. But we can collect data and use statistical tools to analyze it. So that's what he's been doing. And he's identified 12 main categories or common elements of near-death experiences. And across cultures, across religious people coming from different religious traditions, different ages, old, middle-aged, young, very young, children, these common elements. So first is a death. And one of the researchers pointed out that we shouldn't really call these near-death experiences. There are also people who have experiences who don't die, but actually when the heart stops pumping, it's called flatline, right? You know, the oscilloscope in the old movies, and I guess they have you see the line of the electrical signal on the screen, right? And when the heart stops pumping, the line goes flat. So that's why they call it flatlining. If you flatlined, your heart has stopped pumping. So when does death actually occur? Well, it's difficult to say. That's always a big question. But when the heart stops pumping, the blood stops moving, and all the organs of the body are deprived of fresh oxygen. They no longer get any oxygen. So it's said that within seconds, the organs of the body stop functioning, and the brain also flatlines. When the heart flatlines, within the seconds, the brain flatlines. So this is important to remember. So it's actually a death experience. The brain has stopped functioning, and these highly conscious experiences are being reported. So it's amazing. All right. So what are the common elements? First is a death or a near death by cardiac arrest, drug allergy, disease, drowning, car accident, overdose. There are suicide attempts also, so they experience at least one, often many, or many of these 12 elements. Probably depends on the person, different elements. So not everyone will experience all of these. In fact, probably very few would experience each one of these, but these are the 12 common experiences. First, and I'll just read all of them quickly, and then we'll look at some of these in more detail. One, and then we'll read some experiences. They're thrilling to read. If you haven't read any or many of them, we'll get to that. So first is out-of-body experience, often called an OBE, where typically someone sees their own body from above. Number two, And 75% of the experiences experience this. Number 2, heightened senses, increased clarity, seeing intense colors, hearing at a distance, feeling the emotions of others. These heightened senses. 75% report some kind of feeling of heightened sensitivity, more consciousness. 3, intense and generally positive emotions or feelings of peace, love, joy. Intense emotions. Number 4, passing into or through a tunnel. This is the stereotypical near-death experience, going through a tunnel and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Actually, turns out that only about 30% of near-death experiencers experience going through a tunnel. So that is a significant amount, but it's far less than half even. Number 5, encountering a mystical or brilliant light, sometimes described as being of the nature of unconditional, infinite love. About 65% report experiencing light. Number 6, encountering other beings, either mystical beings, maybe spiritual guides, or deceased relatives or friends, even relatives that they did not know they had. This is a fascinating kind of corroboration of the validity when they reported that, Mom, you never told me you had a sister. Oh yeah, she died long before you were born, that kind of thing. Number 7, a sense of altered time or space, reporting that time stops, or a second is like an hour, or an hour is like a second. Number 8, a life review, experiencing the whole life, experiencing how their actions affected others, about 20%. Encountering unworldly or heavenly realms, going to a heaven, beautiful gardens and things like that. Encountering or learning special, number 10, encountering or learning special knowledge, like the nature of God or the purpose of life, learning about past incarnations, learning about the work remaining on earth, that is the work remaining for that person to be done when they come back. They still have some work to do. Number 11, encountering a boundary or a barrier, a point of no return, and realizing that if they crossed this barrier, they wouldn't be able to return. And sometimes wanting to cross that barrier, but being unable to, and being sent back. And so number 12, this is the one common element of all of them, is a return to the body. All these people have returned to the body to tell us about it. That's how we can tell. And either voluntary or sometimes involuntary. There are some reports of people who in that state, they're told they have to go back and screaming at the top of their lungs, no, no. And then with a crash, they're back in the body. So so he didn't list this, but I would also add to this list the after effects. The after effects of a near-death experience are generally transformative. They transform the life of a person who had them, though it's not easy, oftentimes not easy at all, to integrate the experience into life. The experiences are ineffable. They're very difficult to put into words, very difficult to find the words to describe these experiences. Most of the near-death experiences that are reported, at least, are very positive. However, there are a few negative experiences. They call them hellish or terrifying or hellish experiences. So that is, we acknowledge that there are a few experiences of very difficult, terrifying. Not visiting not a heavenly realm, but a hellish realm. And those are brutal to read, those. So let's look at some of these elements in more detail. First, the OBE, the out-of-body experiences. So Vedanta, we are constantly reminding ourselves, we are not our bodies. We are not, but I feel like I'm my body. It's so hard to overcome the feeling that I am this body. We are inhabiting this body. But few of us know from direct experience that we are not our bodies. We're so identified with it. When the body falls sick, what do we say? I'm sick. I have the flu. I got COVID. Right? What I? The body. Body got COVID. I didn't get COVID. And how old are you? Oh, I am 56 years old. I'm talking about the body only. The body is 56 years old. I am timeless. My true nature in Vedanta is never born and does not die. How can I talk about 56? Only the body. So we're talking body, body, body all the time. It's very difficult to overcome. In an out-of-body experience, a person typically finds him or herself floating above their body, seeing it from above, perhaps seeing doctors or emergency technicians working on the body. And fascinating, they often don't even recognize that that's my body. That's in a sense, that's me. Here, let's read a part of a near-death experience report, which has a number of these elements which we've discussed. So this man who died from ventricular tachycardia, also known as VTAC arrhythmia. So the heart is it's still pumping, but it's not pumping enough. So it's actually, it goes into some kind of trembling. Any doctors here? So you know what it is.
It's fibrillation.
Fibrillation. So it no longer is pumping blood. So he's died he's in the hospital. So we're jumping into the description. Next thing, I am out of my body. I'm up in the air, like 8 feet, looking down. I'm me. I have the same mind, and I am looking around. I looked over to the left, and someone was there, like a friend, someone I knew for a long time. So there he's meeting some other being. I did notice that time was all crazy. A second was an hour, and an hour was like a second. My overall thought was, wow, how cool. I looked into the hallway, and there were these paramedic guys there. There was a lady who I thought was the ambulance driver. They all looked really concerned. And I thought, wow, what's going on with them? Then I saw my partner. He was there in the hallway. And he looked so short compared to the paramedic guys. He looked horrified. I was thinking, why could they possibly be so upset? I see a hospital table down below and a guy on it. He has a beard. He kind of looks like me. Slowly, I realize, it is me. It is me. At the same time, the person next to me sent the understanding, and I said at the same time, I'm dead. So this realization suddenly, that's me. There were people working on me, and I'm sensing this big, bright light behind me. I know there is no roof or walls behind me, just like a big void. I could sense it. Black on the outside with light in the middle. I feel great. I'm sensing there are all these people standing behind me, but I never turn around to see them. I can just feel them. I feel like who I was always supposed to be. Everything was so clear. I could see so well out of both eyes. I understood and felt what everyone in the room was thinking and feeling. Everything made sense to me. I saw myself like some old clothes laying on the floor, and I really didn't want to put them back on. Saw myself, here he's referring to his body. He saw his body lying there and like old clothes, which is the teaching of Sri Krishna in the Gita, Vasansi Jirnani, etc. Just as we discard old clothes and put on new ones, so the soul discards old bodies and puts on new ones. So this is his direct experience, like old clothes. He's not familiar with the Gita. He's not a Vedantist, but he's having this Vedantic experience. So he says, I really didn't want to go back to my stupid life. Then I'm being pulled fast, backward and up and back into the air. Me on the table is disappearing way below. I felt absolute and total love and acceptance. Unconditional. God, I guess. Like nothing I have felt. Obviously, he doesn't have the religious language because he's not a religious man, but he's describing the divine. Like nothing I have felt. I can't explain it. I just don't have the words. Then, in a second, I felt what everyone was feeling in the room. Adam, his life partner, the doctors, the paramedics, and I felt all the students I have ever worked with in my life at the same time. I guess he's a teacher. Now I am noticing that the me on the table is being held in the arms of some lady. And I stop moving backward and start moving back down towards me. She is holding me like a mother or something. And the feeling was amazing. It just so touched me. And it moved me like nothing else ever has. Then I just thought really ambivalently, whatever, I'll go back. The next second, I'm slammed into my body. My eyes open, and I am hurting again. I pass out. So this is a report. It's quite typical, actually, and we see that it has a number of these elements that we discussed. This out-of-body experience, and taking some time to actually recognize his own body when he's outside of it. We all experience our bodies only from within it. And though we see it in a mirror, but we only see it directly. And seeing it from above, lying on a stretcher on a hospital table with people working on it, must be very disconcerting, and it takes some time to recognize. So the other elements besides the out-of-body experience, he had this experience of altered time. He had an experience of divine light, and he was met by other beings. There were other beings there. He experienced unconditional love. He had this hyper awareness of others' feelings. He could feel how the other people in the room were feeling. He has still having this confusion of me. He's saying there I was on the table. He's having this kind of bifurcation. On the one hand, he's knows that he's not that, and that it's old clothes, and yet then he says, but then I saw myself on the table there. So both sides he had. So some of the most remarkable out-of-body experiences occur in emergency rooms and operating rooms when people get this cardiac arrest. And what's exciting about these out-of-body experiences is that some things can be corroborated afterwards, which lends them a lot of authenticity. Someone reports, I experienced this. Well, okay, prove it. How do we know that you really experienced that? You could have just hallucinated it. Well, this was an interesting case, and this is a well-known case called the dentures case. One man was in cardiac arrest, and a nurse was putting in a breathing tube, and he was wearing dentures. So she removed the dentures and put them in the drawer of the crash cart. The crash cart is the cart with all the materials for the resuscitating someone in cardiac arrest. So the nurse removed the dentures and put them in the drawer on the crash cart, and he saw it from above. So he was resuscitated. He recovered. He's in the hospital. He doesn't have his dentures. They don't know where they are. No one can find them. A week later, the nurse who had removed the dentures comes to his room, and he tells her, "Oh, you know where my dentures are." So this is called the dentures case in the literature. Very strong evidence that it's corroborated. He saw it. He saw the nurse. Said, "You know where they are," and so they were retrieved, and he got his dentures back. Here's another case. It's a really profound case. The Pamela Reynolds case. She was a singer-songwriter, and she was in her, I don't know how old she was, if she was in her 40s maybe, and she had a brain aneurysm. Aneurysm is when the blood vessel becomes very thin, and it could burst at any time, and it was beginning to leak. So basically, it was a death sentence. She has hours or days to live. So they decided to do a surgery. How did they do it? They cooled her whole body down to 50 degrees, stopped her heart, drained all the blood from her brain. Then they could do the surgery safely. Once it was removed, the aneurysm was removed and repaired. They pumped the blood back in, warmed her up, and restarted her heart. And amazingly, she lived 20 years after that. And during the surgery, her eyes were taped shut, and her ears had special earplugs, which were emitting very loud clicks, 10 clicks per second. So hearing things in the room, practically impossible. The loud clicks that were to enable the doctors to monitor brain activity. If they see spikes, then they know the ears are reporting to the brain is sensing the click. So her senses to the outside world were completely shut off. And then, of course, all the blood was drained and her brain was completely inactive, obviously, no blood even. Obviously non-functional brain, and she had a vivid near-death experience during the surgery. And she was able to describe some things that you couldn't have known, like the instrument used to cut open her skull. She described it, she was asking about it. The insertion of the shunt into the femoral arteries and veins. And she saw the doctor working by her groin, which surprised her. That's where they go into the stick the shunt. She's like, I thought I'm getting brain surgery. Why are they working down there? And so she asked about it afterwards and found out all these things. And she even heard the surgeon complain that the veins were too small, corroborated afterwards, these kind of things. And she saw that they administered 2 defibrillation shocks at the end of the surgery. She heard what music was playing in the operation theater. All these details were verified afterwards by the surgeons. And there are other fascinating details about her experience where she went into an otherworldly light. She met her grandmother and uncle. Her uncle guided her back to her body, which she did not want to enter. And he pushed her back into it. So this is the kind of corroboration that lends a lot of authenticity to these reports. When people want to say, oh, it's just a hallucination of a dying brain, explain this then. You can't explain it if who we are is limited to the activity of brain cells. This would be impossible, and yet it's happening. So the materialists are very uncomfortable with it, and really there's only one solution, is that we have to acknowledge the possibility that materialism is wrong. Another verifiable element, meeting of relation on the other side whom the person did not know had died. And after reviving, learning that the person had died. Sometimes people who are close to death, maybe they've been in a terrible accident and they're struggling in the hospital, and then a close relation dies. And the family doesn't want to tell the person in the hospital they're clinging on to life by a thread. And you don't want to tell when mom is clinging on to life by a thread, you don't want to say, Mom, your son just died in a car crash. You don't tell her that. Can she bear the shock? And she has a near-death experience. And she meets her son on the other side, and she comes back and says, "Hey, you didn't tell me that my son had died." So this is verifiable. It kind of lends a tremendous authenticity to these kind of to these reports. So the sheer number, it's not 1 or 2, it's thousands. This of NDEs being reported, it's very robust evidence that consciousness does not depend on brain function. Does not depend on brain function because when the brain is not functioning at all, people are having these highly conscious experiences that they can remember, they can report them later, and they can be elements of them can be corroborated by others who were awake and alive at the time. So it comes back again. It's in the latest reports that I read, this kind of complaint that the doctors dismissed my reports or the nurses wouldn't listen to me. They said I'm crazy. These are not coming up so much anymore, but it used to be a regular feature of near-death experiences that you tell the doctors and they dismiss it. And it's very frustrating. Of course, still skeptics try to explain away the experience. As I mentioned, hypoxia or reconstructing memories after the fact. So some researchers have started to research these things. So seeing what happens when the brain is starved for oxygen. What kind of experiences do people report then? Disjointed and confused generally, whereas NDEs are coherent. If it's a reconstructed memory, well, let's try. A researcher asked people who had died but did not remember a near-death experience to describe what happened to them while they were unconscious. They could not accurately describe. They tried to imagine it. They could not accurately describe what happened. Whereas people who had the out-of-body experience and saw what happened, they very accurately described. So that suggests that it's not simply a reconstructed memory. Like you think you remember it, but you didn't actually. So the scientific potpourri, Swami Vivekananda called it, that in spite of the evidence, the strong evidence, they're just unable to accept it. So it's gradually changing. But it's also understandable in a sense, because the study of brain function has come a long way, and the functions, the various functions of our body have been pinpointed to be controlled by certain areas of the brain. And if certain areas of the brain are stimulated, you can stimulate memories, and we can easily demonstrate the connection between brain and mind by, say, drinking a couple of glasses of scotch or something, or taking a sleeping pill, right? You take or drink a cup of coffee. It changes our mind to a certain extent. So it does seem like there's a relation between our brain and our mind. And then there's the tragic study of brain injuries, which leave people functional but handicapped in strange ways. But there's a fascinating book called "The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat," by a brain researcher himself. I can't remember his name right now, but he describes one man who could no longer form new memories. So all the old memories were intact, but he could no longer form new memories. So he'd meet, when he recovered from the illness or whatever, it destroyed that part of his brain, he would see someone, and it would be like the first time he was seeing him. And every time he would see an old friend, he'd be like, "Oh my God, I haven't seen you for years. How are you? Oh my gosh." He'd just seen him yesterday, but he couldn't remember he'd seen him yesterday. It was a tragic kind of and mysterious. So it seems often that brain is enough to explain the mind when we see these kind of things. So this is how the old religion is smashed by science. You say you have a soul, but actually everything can be explained by brain. So who was it who said, I didn't need that hypothesis to explain the universe? Someone asked one of the great scientists, do you remember that quote? He had an explanation of how the universe forms, and
Einstein?
No, I think it was before that, long before that, that somebody asked him, "Well, where is God in the picture?" And he said, "I didn't find the need for that hypothesis." So, well, if you can explain everything with matter, why do you need God? Why do you need to bring in consciousness? Physics and chemistry and biology is enough to explain everything. So these reports, these near-death experience reports of fully conscious experiences, when the brain is completely non-functional, they smash this myth of materialism. So that's why it's so exciting, and it really is a real doubt destroyer. If we have these niggling doubts, reading some of these experiences, it's almost like reading scripture. You read some of them, read like scripture, and it really, at least for me, it has greatly strengthened my conviction that the teachings of Vedanta are indeed true, because they report these conscious experiences without the support of a brain or a body. And of course, that also raises an important question. In that case, if they are helping establish beyond a doubt that consciousness is primary, that we are not our bodies, that we are able to think and have conscious experiences without the support of our bodies and brains, then why, so long as we are in our bodies, does it seem that our mental experience is so much defined by our brains and by the limitations of the physical? And what is the nature of the connection then between who we are and that mind which is able to function without the support of the body, but while it's in the body, it seems to be completely constrained by it. And if we get a mental illness or Alzheimer's, we can no longer function properly. So we're somehow who we are. We're talking really about the Jivatman right now, the individual soul. When it's in a body, we are somehow locked into it, and we are constrained by the limitations of the body. And when the brain has dysfunction, we feel like we have the dysfunction. So it's really raises that very interesting question. Another question: why do only some people who die report near-death experiences? they have done studies of when interviewing all the cardiac arrest patients in the hospital, and they find about 10 to 20% of those who had cardiac arrest report a near-death experience. So that's another question. We don't have the answers to those questions yet. Let me read a little quote from Sri Ramakrishna. He went to visit Keshav Sen during Keshav's last illness, and Keshav was very ill. It was clear he wasn't going to make it. He wasn't going to make it. And Sri Ramakrishna was saying to himself, the body and the soul. The body was born and it will die. But for the soul, there is no death. It is like the betel nut. When the nut is ripe, it does not stick to the shell. But when it is green, it is difficult to separate it from the shell. After realizing God, one does not identify oneself anymore with the body. Then one knows that the body and the soul are two different things. So after a near-death experience, including out-of-body experience, the experiencer also knows that the body and the soul, the Atman, who I am, are separate. So one thing that those of us who haven't had them, I have not, by the way, disclaimer, I have not had a near-death experience. I just love reading about them and studying about them, and I've met many people who have them. And so far, in every group that I have given, that I've talked about near-death experiences, afterwards, at least one person has come up to me privately or sometimes in a group and told me, I had one. So they're actually much more common than we realize. Estimated 5% of the population has had near-death experiences. I know personally a number of people who have, and we're hearing them describe it. There's always this conviction in their experience. It really happened. I remember the first one that I heard, it was a guy in Boulder, Colorado. This is before I joined the monastery. And we were talking about religion with a friend of mine, and he introduced me to this friend who had one. He was an older guy. He had been, and I think he probably still was, a construction worker. And he had been carrying rebar, you know, the steel bars that go in concrete, he'd been carrying a long piece of rebar, and he walked under a power line and touched the rebar touched the power line, and he was electrocuted. And he said he saw himself lying down, he saw his body lying down there from above, and he said, it was so peaceful. If you could imagine the most peace you could ever imagine, that would be like one grain of sand. This was a whole beach of sand. He was very enthusiastic about his experience, and he had become also deeply religious. He had joined the Catholic Church, and when we said goodbye, he said, "Well, if I don't meet you again, I'll see you in heaven." And it was very charming. But he had such a transformation on his life. So that's amazing. So why do people not talk about them? Why do we not know? Why perhaps people whom we know have, surely people we all know people who have had these experiences, only we don't know that they've had them. Why? 3 reasons. One, they're very hard to put into words. And second, as we've talked about, they're often met with disbelief. Often people are skeptical. Oh, really? So-and-so has gone off her rocker. And also they're very private. They're sacred experiences. They're very private. They're not something to broadcast. There are people who write books about it and feel called to share about it. But for most people, it's a very private experience that they don't talk about. And surprisingly, a number of them are children who drown. I know 3. I keep thinking 3. Yeah, 3 people who have told me of when they were children and they drowned and had a near-death experience, and then were revived, obviously. So we've just touched a small tip of the iceberg. Let's read a little more. But some of these experiences go much further than what we've read so far. They often describe what they call 360-degree vision. They can still see, but it's no longer limited by this physical body. So you can see like 360 degrees. simultaneous awareness, expanding beyond the immediate surroundings. And these, as I've mentioned, these mystical, transcendent experiences. And the more profound the experiences, the more difficult they are to put into words. So let's read from Anita Moorjani. She is probably you've heard of her book, Dying to Be Me. It's a beautiful, very inspiring book. And she's from Indian origin, but is from Singapore. So this is one small portion of her experience. She was dying of cancer and dying, and they didn't put her on hospice. They were still trying desperately to somehow save her life. And she died in the hospital of cancer. After her near-death experience, we can get into that she had a kind of miraculous recovery from cancer, and within a few months, the doctors could not find any trace of cancer in her body at all. Anyhow, that's inexplainable by medical science. So this is part of her experience. As my emotions were being drawn away from my surroundings, I started to notice how I was continuing to expand, to fill every space, until there was no separation between me and everything else. I encompassed, no, became everything and everyone. I was fully aware of every word of the conversation that was taking place between my family and the doctors, although it was physically some distance away outside my room. I knew the frightened expression on my husband's face and could feel his fear. It was as though, in that instant, I became him. Simultaneously, although I hadn't known of it previously, I became aware that my brother Anup was thousands of miles away on an airplane, anxiously coming to see me. So this experience was corroborated later. The conversations checked out. Her brother Anup was indeed on a plane coming to see her. She continued, there I was, without my body or any of my physical traits, yet my pure essence continued to exist. And it was not a reduced element of my whole self. In fact, it felt far greater and more intense and expansive than my physical being. Magnificent, in fact. I felt eternal, as if I'd always existed and always would, without beginning or end. I was filled with the knowledge that I was simply magnificent. That's so beautiful. So we have this Vedantic idea of seeing the self in all beings and all beings in the self. In Isha Upanishad is there. That mantra, the awakened seer, the illumined sage, sees his own self in all beings and all beings in himself, in the self, in the Atman, in the self. So she's getting a taste of that. She says that she became all the people around her. She was her becoming everything. She's tasting a little bit of Advaita. And she's putting into words a kind of Advaitic experience. She had this experience of her true nature. She says, I felt eternal, as if I had always existed and always would, without beginning, without end. And this feeling that she is magnificent. Our own glory. This is Swami Vivekananda would say, man stands on the glory of his own soul, the infinite, the eternal, the deathless. And again, as this Maya veil becomes thinner and thinner, the inborn natural glory of the soul comes out and becomes more manifest. So we are glorious. Our true nature is glorious. It is beyond our words to describe the glory of who we are. And this is the teaching of Vedanta. And here we have Anita Moorjani and many others who are using the same language. So it's just wonderful. So far, these few NDEs we've looked at are still tied to this realm of time and space. Many experiences describe visiting other realms. Some describe beautiful landscapes and gardens filled with exquisite beauty and flowers and meeting deceased grandparents and parents and siblings, and kind of like traditional descriptions of heaven, actually. And why not? Vedanta also accepts that there are different heavens. So only we don't focus on that because we say they are temporary places also. We want to gain the truth. Anything that, any realm that we go to, any place that we go to, it has to be temporary because it's a place, it's in time. So Vedanta, mostly in the Vedanta teachings, we don't focus on these, but it's there in the scriptures. They're different. They're the different. There's Buru Huvasva and the other. I haven't even memorized them because we don't deal with them much. But the top one is Brahmaloka, and Brahmaloka is the realm from which it is said one can continue to make spiritual progress and finally attain to mukti, to liberation. But there are these other realms in which we dwell, which after death, the soul, depending on its progress, can go to these different realms. And so these are but so I don't want to go into those descriptions, but if you're interested, you can read about them on some of the, there's two websites in particular that are particularly, have great collections. But some of the most inspiring and exciting near-death experience reports describe intensely spiritual and transcendent mystical experiences. And a majority of the experiences do have some element of that. So I think one reason that these are so exciting, another reason these are so exciting for me at least, is that the people who have these experiences are ordinary people like you and me. They're not saints. They're not mystics, or they weren't before. They're just normal people going about their lives. Some of them may be religious, some of them may be practitioners, others have no interest in religion or had no interest in religion beforehand. And they're having these profound experiences of divinity, what we can only say is divinity, which completely transform their lives, which also attests to their validity, because a genuine experience transforms us, which is, by the way, also a genuine test of a spiritual experience. For us as spiritual seekers, we may get an experience. Is it genuine? Does it transform us? Then it's genuine. So what happens? What is the nature of the transformation? People, first of all, people completely lose their fear of death. Almost across the board, all near-death experiences, almost completely, they completely lose their fear of death. They become more compassionate, more loving, more forgiving. They become more spiritually inclined, and usually less religiously inclined. And in fact, many of the really religious people who are in some narrow sect which has specific doctrines about the nature of the soul and the nature of God, they doubt their experiences, because often the experiences don't tally with the dualistic religious conceptions. Most Christians, for instance, do not report seeing Jesus, though some do. Some have experiences where they meet Jesus, but most do not. And so most near-death experiences, if they were religious, they go beyond the limited conceptions of religion. They realize that the divine is real and beyond all words and ideas. They realize that conventional religious people like us have a very limited conception of the divine, because we're not yet established in God consciousness. Another point to mention, to note, which is interesting, is they also don't become saints. They have this profound experience, transformative experience, but it doesn't make them into saints. They still come back with all the baggage, and they have to work through it. And sometimes it takes years to integrate the experience into their lives. So we see from the Vedantic standpoint, premature realization also can be a problem, like having an experience before we're ready for it, a spiritual glimpse. So this is the importance of preparation, of purification. That's why Vedanta emphasizes also the practices. How do we prepare ourselves? The yamas and niyamas, for instance, of yoga. Okay, let's read another example. Here's Michelle. Name is Michelle P. She was shot in the neck by her boyfriend. I could see myself from above, as if I was perched on a corner of the ceiling in the room, looking down at myself. I saw all kinds of police and firefighters looking over my body and stepping around me. I had no pain. I had no blame toward anyone, no ill feelings. I felt so blissful and whole, full of the most love I had ever experienced. I thought to myself, if this is dying, then it is not as bad as everyone thinks it is. Then I saw a light from above me. It was pulling me away from the room. I figured it was okay to just let this happen, to go with the flow and accept whatever was to be. The light was getting brighter, engulfing my body. Body? I had no body. It stayed back down in that damp room. I realized that I was dead physically, but mentally I was still alive. My soul was now my body. I looked up into the light. I could see someone beckoning me to come. He was there at the end of this lit tunnel. Then I heard a voice. It was a man's voice. He asked me if I was ready. I felt so good. It was so easy. We think dying is hard. She says it was so easy. It reminds me of Sri Ramakrishna when everyone was weeping so much for him after he left. And he said, have I gone to another place? Here I am. I've just passed from one room to another. And how he described his nephew Akshay's death as just like drawing a sword from the scabbard. It was just that easy. Shall I keep going? It's getting late, but it's so thrilling. I'll read a few more. We are fortunate that some of the people who had these experiences also have a gift with language and can at least poetically somehow transmit some of their experience. Like Anita Moorjani, obviously she has a gift with language. And some report the dissolving of ego, of that sense of who I am. And they describe something of what we imagine the state of enlightenment, of egolessness to be. Here's Annie P. She was in a car accident. After seeing her body, she begins to rise, accompanied by a guide. And she writes, as the extraordinary event unfolded, my escort and I ascended into the sky. Unconditional love became more concentrated. The awareness filled my inner consciousness with joy, comfort, and ecstasy. A blinding, magnetic, brilliant light focused on my forehead, drawing me closer and closer to the light that was beginning to encompass my whole being. Unconditional love intensely flowed everywhere without effort, honoring and glorifying every cell with a total awareness of physically, emotionally, and mentally being within love at last. Every cell is gently caressed in the all-abundant love, honoring and glorifying every bit of who I am. Capital W, capital I, capital A. Love that flowed without any conditions or effort, omnipresent and very real. The love abundantly flowed without any restrictions, conditions, or commitments. As we ascended, the clutches of the dramas that ego entertained disappeared. Ego's continual habit of self-sabotage was non-existent at last. The veil which separated me from experiencing the reality of unconditional love was effortlessly dissolved. In Thousand Island Park, Swami Vivekananda, when he was truly inspired, he said, the adamantine wall that shuts us in is egoism. Until we give up the world manufactured by the ego, never can we enter the kingdom of heaven. None ever did, none ever will. To give up the world is to forget the ego, to know it is not all, living in the body, but not of it. This rascal ego must be obliterated. So Annie experienced that dissolving of the ego, and also the nature of the divine as love. As Swami Vivekananda put it, the very idea of God is love. Seeing a cat loving her kittens, stand and pray. God has become manifest there, also in inspired talks. Most reporters do not call the light as a personal God. They speak more in terms of the impersonal. But there's a couple of I found just a few that express this idea that we have of harmony of religions. Let me just read those. One is quite humorous. Jean, who died in Mexico of an acute asthma attack. The light turned a magnificent blue and rolled toward me like an ocean wave. It was not really close to me, but nevertheless, I could see the image of Jesus within the blue wave. Love poured out upon me like warm water. Jesus looked just like he did on the poster in my Sunday school class. I had the thought that if I had been a Buddhist, perhaps he would look like Buddha. And I was told, that is right. God appears in a familiar form. So she had a vision of Jesus. And here's another really amazing experience. A woman named Linda S. After a long illness, she died. She had been raised in the Southern Baptist tradition. And though we do our best not to criticize any religious tradition, but I'm just reading her explanation. My early concept of God was molded by the pervasive, extremist religious community of the Bible Belt, exemplified by the Southern Baptist religion practiced by my parents. The wrathful, vengeful God, as taught by my religion, instilled in me a deep fear of God, death, and the afterlife. So she was terrified of dying because she was terrified of hell, because God is a vengeful God and a wrathful God, and is sinners in the hands of an angry God. Is that famous sermon by some preacher 100 years ago, which is still studied by the fundamentalists. So her experience completely transformed her. But interestingly, she had still felt the experience was a Christian one, as it were. As my mind cleared, scoured of the remnants of mortal past associations, I was finally able to open my being fully to spirit, and my vision cleared. With the eyes of my soul body, I looked to see what held me in such love, and I beheld a radiant spirit being, so magnificent and full of love that I knew I would never again feel the sense of loss. I have no way of explaining how, but I knew the spirit was Christ. Others might have called him Buddha or Yahweh or Great Spirit in the sky, but the naming did not matter. Only the recognition of absolute love and truth was important. Safe in the gentle yet powerful embrace of his love, I rested, secure that everything was okay, exactly as it was supposed to be. Ascending ever farther, I lifted my eyes to see a great light in the vast distance. With Christ as my guide, I rapidly approached the light. Ecstasy filled my soul as I looked at the radiance, many-fold brighter than a sun. The light was everywhere and everything the brightest I had ever seen and dazzling beyond description, brilliant enough to blind or burn, yet I was not harmed. The light moved over and through me, washing every hidden place of my heart, removing all hurt and fear, transforming my very being into a song of joy. I had thought the love I felt from Christ was complete, yet the light toward which we were soaring was the fulfillment of my search, the loving source of all that exists, the God of truth and unconditional love, the origin of creation. My understanding of love was forever changed. The majesty and glory of that vision was an ineffable moment that defined forevermore the direction of my new truth. I was home, and I wanted nothing more than to remain in the light of God. Christ had delivered me into the light, and I stood in the presence of God. I was filled with complete knowing. The light was love, and love was God. Waves of consummate love which emanated from the light obliterated every burden I carried and every thought that kept me from knowing God. There was no limit to the outpouring as I came to the rapturous awareness. There was no place that God did not exist, and I was within God. I am an inseparable part of the light. The truth of who I am Indeed, who we all are is perfect love as a creation of God. All of God's creation is one creation, and I am one with creation. God and I are one. Finally, it all made sense. God could only love me because God is only love, nothing other than love. The only reality is God. There cannot be another, and God is love. What a vision. What a realization. She experienced the light, the divine, as infinite love, as separate from her, and then she merged with it. She had a profound realization of her identity with infinite love. And there's echoes of the Gita also when Arjuna had the Vishvarupa Darshanam, the vision of the universal form. And Sanjaya describes the vision as like the splendor of 1,000 suns rising in the sky, rising together. This intense light which is bright enough to burn but does not burn. So this is, so many of these accounts emphasize love and the experiences state that this is our purpose, to manifest love, to learn to love everyone. As Swami Vivekananda would put it to Mary Hill, the practice of religion is through this feeling of oneness that is love. All right, two more. Can you hang on for a little more? You're all right? All right, one that's hinting at a state, an experience of non-duality of Advaita. What about that? What about the Vedantic teachings of Advaita? This woman had complications from surgery and she died. I was one with God consciousness. I was still aware of myself as me, but the super expanded version, the version that knew and saw all. Here's another, that's just a glimpse. Here's a woman named Jill who died in a motorcycle crash. She describes a pool of liquid surrounding a divine presence. And then she says, when I stepped into the liquid, all that was Jill disappeared. I, quote unquote, no longer existed. And yet I was still there. I was the essence of life. I don't know what else to call it. I was conscious of my surroundings. I had joined with all the other consciousness in the pool and had become one with it. I knew all other life in the pool. I was one with everything. I was home. She goes on to state, the big guy on the throne is a fairy tale for children. The Trinity is for people who can't think for themselves. All religions get so close and then miss the truth by a mile. The truth I learned is that we, and when I say we, I mean all of existence, are connected. Okay, let's just touch briefly on the life review because this is also fascinating. This is commonly reported, and the whole of life, even insignificant details, are remembered, and it often seems to take place instantaneously. The idea of karma we have, no action is without its effect. Many of these life review descriptions, some of them, the people experience how their actions have affected others and how that effect again rippled out to others and others. And however, there's no judge. None of the life reviews have experienced any judge. We ourselves, from that standpoint, judge our actions. How did we do? How did we do on earth? How did we do in this life? From that standpoint, when we're touched by that infinite love, we can judge how loving were we. So this is fascinating. This Cami, I'm not sure if it's a man or a woman, possibly a woman. Cami R, she was crushed under a car. The car rolled over or something. Here I could see the whole picture, how every thought and motivation of the previous life passage snaked tendrils of manifestation into the world, and how each tendril rolled out to affect other people and all of life. I felt everything, every little kindness, every subtle dig, Each moment of carelessness, the wasted potentials, the comfort passed on to others, the secret joys, impatience, self-pity, a genuine smile to a lonely person at the right moment, ripples from a tossed pebble. I experienced how everyone experienced my actions and intentions, and how everyone they affected felt, and so on down the chain of action and reaction, flowing even into nature itself. More importantly, I could see how things could have been if enacted with pure love. Each action was balanced by its effect on the life force in total. The chain ran from my link back up, retracing and revealing why I made the choices I did, why my full intentions were not in alignment with my professed goals. Saw the causes and effects through multiple lifetimes. It was as if the web of this incarnation was a soft silk, and we were holding it up to examine thread by thread, seeing how it draped in all directions from each point we lifted, seeing where the tensions ran through other layers and other lifetimes. With this review, there was no blame, no shaming, no rejection. So this is very poetic and fascinating how she refers to other incarnations, and we find this so matter-of-factly just saying other incarnations and how every action, the effects of our actions, how those actions affected other people and how that in turn affected them too. So the web of karma is very, very complex. The whole, from this description, we see how we are all interconnected, and how the smile that I give to someone at the grocery store might affect how he treats his daughter that evening, and then how she ends up growing up. And it's just, it gives us also a tremendous responsibility to be mindful in our actions with others. Tremendous responsibility. All right, we'll slowly wrap it up here. The last element of the near-death experience is a return to the body. As I mentioned, there's often a boundary described, crossing which return would no longer be possible. Sometimes people are given a choice to stay or return. And obviously, presumably some people choose not to return. Often people are come back for children or relatives who still feel they still need them. And someone who has young children, she's given the choice, or he will come back. And they can see the trajectory. They're given the choice, but see, if you don't return, look what happens to your kids in the future. And then see if you do return, what happens. And then they understand that it's their place to return. But other times they return against their will. They even argue with the light or the guide, because they describe feeling home at last, having returned to their true home, and to leave that again can be very painful. One humorous thing which does not quite tally with our teachings of Vedanta, though it may play a role still. We often emphasize that the final thought at the time of death is important. We emphasize the final thought, that our trajectory is determined by the last thought that we have. And so we should always be thinking of God, because we want to go to God. And we are sure that as we think of God, as we leave the body, we ascend to the divine. But here we find many cases people were not having noble thoughts. They were terrified in a car crash, and one was fascinating. A man was shot, and he was driving a new car. And as he was leaving his body, he saw that there was chewing gum on the sole of his shoe. And the thought that was going through his mind as he was leaving his body was, I hope that none of the gum got on the carpet of my new car. And then he went on to have a profound experience of transcendence. So perhaps in the infinite grace and mercy of the divine, it's not even necessarily so that we have, that the final thought is that important. On the other hand, we only see the first stage, right? We only see the first stage of people leaving their bodies, and then they come back. What happens in the next stage, we don't see. And there, the general tenor, the general trend of our life surely plays a tremendous role in the next stage. A few points I wanted to mention. One, many children have near-death experiences, often through drowning, and it's extremely important to help them process that and integrate it. And one of the people I know who had one, she still has difficulties because it was never acknowledged. She never mentioned it. It was completely swept under the rug. It happened. It was never talked about afterwards. And this has been difficult for her. And was a study done that children who had near-death experiences who didn't get help processing that, suicide rate is much higher later on. People who tried to commit suicide and experience a near-death experience, do not try again. Suicide is not a valid path to a near-death experience. Don't do it. If we're feeling suicidal, and I'm speaking to everyone here and anyone who may be watching, this is not a route to a transcendent experience. It's an extremely negative act. Think of the experience of karma and how our actions affect others. How much pain how many hearts we break if we commit suicide. Though I know suicide often, it comes out of a sense of absolute desperation often and feeling. But rather take hope, take inspiration that just beyond the veil lies the glory of our own soul. And we can realize that we can get treatment, we can get help, we can take up spiritual practice. Suicide is not, and just the fact that people who do try and have, they never try again. Except of course, or people who have near-death experiences from a suicide attempt, don't try again. Among children who had near-death experiences who didn't get a chance to integrate it, they have a higher rate of suicide than general population. That's true. Not all. There are also a lot of other similar experiences which are not technically near-death experiences, where people didn't actually die. People have had experiences from tremendous terror. They leave their body and have an experience, though they weren't actually in danger of death. Otherwise, other spiritual out-of-body experiences, often indistinguishable from these experiences, but no death. There even have been some shared near-death experiences. There was one, several I've read about, where a couple dies in an accident, and only one comes back, and they're going together. They're ascending together, and then one goes on across the boundary, and the other has to come back. Those are, and one of those is kind of frightening and chilling. The very negative drug addicts, and they both died from an overdose, and they went to a hellish realm, and it was truly hellish. And then the woman of the couple, she somehow found it in herself to call on God, and she was pulled out of that hellish realm into a safer place, and then she revived, and her boyfriend did not. So the last she saw of her boyfriend was being tortured in a hellish realm. So it's but okay, so let's end on a positive note. There's two websites. One is called Dr. Jeffrey Long, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, NDERF.org. And the other is I forget what they call it, International Association of Near-Death Studies, I think, IANDS, and that is IANDS.org. Both of these websites invite people to submit their experiences, and people do. The Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, they have actually a lengthy questionnaire, which is meant to weed out people who might be trying to submit false experiences, trying to make it up, because that could be an objection. Oh, people are making this stuff up. So that lengthy questionnaire with asking the same question in different ways, and to root out contradictions, and fakers mostly don't have the patience to go through long questionnaires. So apparently he reported that he only found one false report in all the time. It's fascinating reading. If you're interested, look it up. a wonderful corroboration, a confirmation of the Vedantic teachings. I think what is so wonderful about Vedanta is so broad. It has the breadth to embrace all these experiences, each one of them unique, yet all unfolding within the infinite consciousness that is Brahman, the infinite consciousness that is our true nature, that lies behind everything. And as I mentioned, it's very encouraging because these people are not great saints or yogis or meditators. They're ordinary people like you and me, for whom the veil was removed, who had the being locked in the body was for a moment, they were released from the cage of the body and had a direct experience of the divine. Their lives often transformed. It's a great reminder of our true nature, of the nature of the divine, our birthright as infinite love and bliss, and also a reminder of the tremendous responsibility we have to act from love. And finally, let's remind ourselves the message of Vedanta is we don't have to die to experience this. This experience is available to us as spiritual seekers through spiritual discipline and seeking divine grace. This experience is possible for us even without having a near-death experience. We don't have to die to have this experience. So sorry, I took a long time, but I felt like most of you were with me and still wanting to touch all the points. So thank you for staying with me, and apologize for making it late. And let's just take just a moment of silence, and then we'll have a closing prayer. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Mritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us unto light. From death, lead us to immortality. Oh, peace, peace, peace.
Any questions, Kritik? Maharaj?
I think it's late. I talked too much. Let's go.